All right, so thank you all again for joining us tonight, and I'm very excited to introduce Richard P. Hulser, the Chief Librarian at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County. Richard oversees the print and digital content for the libraries and the archives there at the Natural History Museum. He has an MA in Librarianship and Information Management from the University of Denver, and a Master's in Education and Instructional Media and Product Development from Utah State. He has over 30 years of experience in information management in a variety of settings, academic, corporate, and cultural institution environments. He's a fellow of SLA and is very active in that organization, and he also works with the San Jose State High School for some mentoring and internship placement, which I was happy to learn about at ALA this past summer when I got to meet Richard. So again, I'm very thrilled to have him here with us tonight, and thank you all again for joining us, and thank you to Richard specifically for being so flexible with rescheduling our event. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Richard, and thank you again.
Well, hi everybody. I think you should all be able to hear me, right? I'm very happy to talk with you tonight and meet you virtually, and so let's get started on this fun topic. And what I'm going to do is try to monitor the chat, and as questions come up, go ahead and put them in there on the page or the topic I'm discussing, and then Jeremy as co-moderator, I guess, or moderator, he can remind me later if I happen to miss a question or a comment or two at the end. So I think we'll have plenty of time for questions. So thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, good, we'll do. All right, so 2 points extra for anyone who recognizes the character I have been turned into in the lower left-hand corner, and you can feel free to type that in. Yeah, very good, Caitlin, very fast. So that was done for a talk I gave at the Internet Librarian Conference on using business principles in cultural and academic environments. My co-speaker was Sonia True, who's a digital librarian at a university in Orange County in California here, and she's the one who came up with the idea of putting these caricatures of us as superheroes, and I think the title was something about super internet librarians in action or something like that. But so it was kind of fun. So I thought, well, that would be kind of a fun character to put out for this. And while I really am pleased that there are video capabilities, looking at my face talking is not very exciting. So I'm not going to put it on. If I was in my office, I'm at home now because the connection's better, believe it or not. But if I was in my office and I could show you virtually around the place, then that would be exciting, and maybe we can do that for another thing some other time, especially with the Page Museum projects that we're going to be doing over the next bunch of months, which I will try to explain that aren't in any particular screens that you'll see, but hopefully I'll talk about it and the value of participating in this instead of just reading the slides later. Okay, so let's get moving along. All right, so what I know Jeremy had asked me to talk a lot about the mix of technologies, museums, libraries, and archives, and I happen to be responsible and work in all three. And as you heard, I have a degree in library science and information management and records management from the University of Denver. I don't have an archivist certification. However, I've had some training, and I have an archivist reporting to me. So, and I've worked in corporate archives and other things. So those of you who are archivists, which we're going to ask in about a minute, chime in and whatnot. But okay, so what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about the mix, certainly these days, of mixing traditional practices with technological enhancements, because it's not all about the technology, it's all about what you need to get done, and how technology in the right way can help you do that. And having worked at IBM among other places, which you'll hear about in a minute, I've got that background as well. So what I'm going to talk about, as you see on the screen there, is talk about our publications at our institution, digitization of those, which is becoming kind of a standard thing in certain places, but still pretty new in some ways. I'm going to talk about a couple of projects in digitization related to that, both with audiovisual materials, which is CAVPP, and I'll explain what that is later, and the BHL, the Biodiversity Heritage Library, I'll also explain later. And intermixed with that is some of the more mundane stuff, which is having an online catalog, running a website, maybe adding some social media aspects to that, looking at really taking an archive and a rare book and special collections and taking them from being perceived to be just something dusty in a closet somewhere to something extremely active and important to everyday activities at an institution and beyond. And then this thing with little a, although the PowerPoint made it a big A, altmetrics, which is using more than the metrics we know in library and archives, but using some metrics for analyzing what social media and regular media looks at or helps us understand as far as research in particular. So we'll get to that too. And what I like to talk about with the people in my institution is how we're looking at energizing library and archive services, for that matter. I put library, but it's really library and archive services at the museum, just really energizing them all and doing it in lots of ways. And I'm going to explain each of these a little bit. Some of the ways have to do with collaborating internally, others collaborating externally, developing partnerships with lots of different groups in different ways, and negotiating. So one of the things you want to look at as students is really not only learning the principles, but when you have an opportunity to have discussions and negotiate, whether it's on a team or as you're negotiating for a new job or whatever, those are skills that are really important and will do well for you for all of your career and at home, for that matter. I want to talk a little bit about how interns and volunteers, and you can be one too, especially if you live in the Los Angeles area, but there's also virtual ways you can do it with some projects. And also one very important key thing, which is strategic planning and how you should incorporate technology strategy planning in your overall plan so that when money comes or crises comes or both come, that you have a way to do it in a coherent and proper way. And we'll talk about that. But first, I know you're all saying yeses about being members of ASIS, so I want to know if you would all just, in the poll, use the poll to raise your hands and say, how many of you are ASIS members? Play some music. Da, da, da. Okay, I see about 3. I guess, Jeremy, how do we do the check mark thing? How did we get that to work? Because one said no with an X, which is good, but there are zeros listed for the check marks, but I'm not sure why. But yeah, but I see there's a couple of...
Sorry, we did a mix of raising hand and using the check marks. I think what we should use is the poll, which is next to the hand. It's a yes or no poll.
Okay. Yes, do that. Do what he said. Okay, so first for ASIS, and looks like we've got 3 yeses with check marks by raising your hand. 4, going, 5. So lots of ASIS members. So we've got about a third of you are ASIS members, and 4 are not. Okay, but there's at least 14 or 15 of you altogether. So that tells me some of you haven't answered yet. But that's okay. Let's go ahead. So it looks like a good portion of you are ASIS members. What about SAA? How many of you are SAA members? To keep me on it. Oh, wow. Lots. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, almost all of you are. Cool. Okay. Well, that's good for me to know. Why do I want to even know that? Well, because it's interesting, A. But B, also as I'm looking at what we're talking about, that I make sure that I cover the topics of interest to you. And then what about SLA, which is an organization I'm very active in and have been on the board and other things. How many of you are members of the SLA student chapter or just regular members? Okay, a couple of you are. So good. I encourage you, regarding associations, no matter what they are, and you've obviously know this because you are a member of at least one, and that is, as a student, it's cheaper to join these various groups, and you really should look at the different ones that are of particular interest to your potential career path, or things or organizations that look interesting so you can get to know what they are and the people in them. Because as you grow older and wiser and get in your career and maybe change jobs a couple of times, each of those organizations may come into play as far as contacts for jobs or education and learning. I can tell you I've gotten to know so many wonderful people as personal friends as well as colleagues. I have gotten job leads through that. I've been asked to be about jobs for other people. Who do I know who has this kind of skill or that kind of interest or lives in this neighborhood who can do these kinds of things? And those have worked well. And word of mouth makes a big difference. So then there's other organizations like the American Alliance of Museums, as they're calling themselves now, and so many others. So, okay, so let's move on to the geography. How many are in the Los Angeles area where I am? Anybody? Good. Okay, about 5 or so, about half of you, or a third of you anyway, are. Okay, good. How many about in Southern California in general, like San Diego, LA, include LA, so you can vote again if you're LA, but beyond LA, but in Southern California, and anyone in Northern California, why don't you chime in as well, just to see how many are in at least in the neighborhood. So a lot of you are. Okay, and beyond. I know there's at least one of you from the East Coast. So how many of you are from beyond California and not from California? Okay, a couple of you. Okay, good. All right, enough information gathering for the moment. Great, thank you for all participating. Okay, so you heard a little bit about my background. Well, I want you to understand that whatever interest you are pursuing, whether it's library science, archival studies, technology, digital librarian, whatever, it's all good, and your career path can be very interesting. I didn't follow a traditional one, as you'll see. I graduated from Utah State with my education degree, but there with lots of library science background, but it wasn't ALA accredited, but they did hire people in libraries, and they hired me as a junior librarian at Snow College from Utah, in the central part of Utah, in rural Utah, and I was born and raised in New York, so think about that one. But I was there for a couple of years. Through circumstance, I became library director in my third year, and that was fun and interesting. I served on statewide committees and got to work with library directors from the major big universities like University of Utah and BYU. And then I went back to school at University of Denver because of this new thing in my day called searching, and worked at IBM first as a librarian for a couple of years, and then had an opportunity to switch over to the marketing and sales area. I worked in a plant site in research as a librarian up in the Poughkeepsie area in East Fishkill, New York, and then moved to Manhattan. And from there, worked many jobs over the next 15 years out of my 18-year career, being what they called an industry specialist in libraries and cultural institutions, because I had a background already with some work I did at the American Museum of Natural History during my first master's degree and during my undergraduate days with my geology degree. But anyway, I worked there, worked as a consultant, an IBM employee as a consultant to cultural institutions, worked with the Vatican, although didn't go there, but worked with the United Nations, worked with the U.S. Navy, worked with lots of academic institutions and whatnot. So that was really an interesting time period. Then had an opportunity to move out west to work for a company called InfoTreeve, a document delivery company that, interestingly enough, recently was bought by the Copyright Clearance Center. I just found out the other day, although it happened last month. So that's an interesting thing. And if you want to know more about private equity investment in the information industry, I just had an article published in Online Searcher, personal plug here, folks, on that topic, and I talk about how a lot of publishing companies have been merging, but I talk particularly about integrated library system companies and some content providers and service providers like InfoTreeve being invested in with private equity money and what that means to us as customers. So read the article. I think you'll find it interesting and whatnot. So then from there I worked for one of our customers, which was Amgen, but I had also in the interim created my own company to do strategic planning, technology planning that I had done as a consultant at IBM for customers, and I did it on my own and got a chance to go to New Zealand and do some workshops there and consult with people there as well as other places around the United States and beyond. And then I worked at Amgen in a library, a more traditional corporate library, where I had 13 people reporting to me, focused on the technology implementation, and let's see, I did all the technology-related stuff, all the licensing negotiation, and put in place a global copyright license agreement with the CCC and what's called RROs, or the equivalent of a Copyright Clearance Center in other places around the world. And then about 4.5 years ago, after I left Amgen, I joined the museum. And so now I've been at the Natural History Museum in Los Angeles County for the past 4.5 years, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about us. So who are we? We are a family of museums. We have a Natural History Museum based in Exposition Park, just south of the University of Southern California campus, for those of you who know the area, and right north of Olympic Stadium, where the 1984 Olympics took place, and the Olympics back in 1932, I think, or somewhere in that neighborhood. We also have the Page Museum, otherwise more widely known as the La Brea Tar Pits, that you might have studied in earth science class at one time in grade school, high school, whatever. And there's some major overhaul we're doing there, starting on, which I'll talk about. And then the William S. Hart Museum, and William S. Hart was a big-time movie star in the silent movies, Western movie star. So he did everything John Wayne and all the rest have done in the Western movies, but he did it first. And his estate is on the north side of LA, and it's part of our family of museums. And just as a side note, the Peterson Automobile Museum was created by our museum, and some of our collection was housed there up until recently. They're renovating, and that's a big archive and registrar challenge to inventory and locate and relocate and move a lot of that material. And the Los Angeles County Museum of Art was originally part of the Natural History Museum because it was called the Museum of History, Science, and Art from 1913 until 1963, when LACMA was built, and people vacated the Natural History Museum and Exposition Park, went over there. And so we still collaborate with them because when people do history of art in the LA area, they have to look at both the archives of LA County Museum of Art, but also ours, because we have all the information going back to day one that LACMA doesn't have in their archive. So there's that. And what we've been doing, when I joined the museum 4.5 years ago, they were embarking on a multi-year plan to really revitalize the physicality of the place, because all of us who have grown up and been to museums, we know them oftentimes as they're great, but over time they got a little bit old, a little neglected, a little dusty, not so exciting the second or third or fifth time around necessarily. For some of us they were, but for some people no. So they, under a multi-million-dollar, $135 million initiative, they've been renovating, and these are 4 of the areas that were done. The Age of Mammals Hall opened soon after I joined the museum. It's gotten many awards, as done the Dinosaur Hall the following year. And then our nature gardens, which they literally turned a parking lot into a garden, a nature preserve. And yes, the whale is in. I have a picture coming up you'll see. The fin whale is what Nancy's asking about, and I believe. We also have a nature lab where we have live animals, including rats in a very interesting maze thing, and a big snake and turtles and stuff like that. And a lot of the kids that come every day to visit love that, of course, as do some of the adults. And then lastly, the Becoming Los Angeles exhibit, which has the Charlie Chaplin costume on display, one of his original tramp outfits, and that's about to come off. And one of the Gone with the Wind costumes that were worn in the opening picnic scene will be on display. And that's a very fragile item, but it's going to be on display for a little while. So there's that. And so what I've done is I'm looking at trying to revitalize the library in that mode. So to give you an idea of what the place looks like, this is an architect's rendition, but it really does look like, I need to get from the marketing department a current picture of it from up on high. But you see the fin whale is in its cage, in its big, huge glass cage, $13 million cage, and you can walk under it and listen to the interesting, eerie music that they play, and see the LED lights behind it. But we have all those gardens. We have a vegetable garden on the left, not too far from the library, and the research library is located on the ground floor in the southeast corner of the museum. And down the hall is the Seaver Center for Western History and Research. And down the street from us, about a 5-minute walk, is the Endeavour Space Shuttle, which everyone thinks is at our place. So everybody, I always have to tell them, no, it's someplace. It's down the street. Go see it, but come back and see our dinosaurs. Come back and see our incredible rare blue diamond that's on loan for a few months. And come see the Ibero-American temporary exhibit of folk art that will be there until next September. And so, okay, enough of that razzle-dazzle. That's what the library looked like back in 1926. And the chairs in the foreground we still have some of those chairs, and they are very comfortable. They're engineered extremely well. And even though you would think wood would not be comfortable, it's actually more comfortable than a lot of the cushioned stuff from the 1960s and 70s. That card catalog in the middle, we still have and use it for our shelf list in the back. And that lady standing at it, we believe, is Lenore Green, who was the first librarian at the Natural History Museum. And to the right is one of the scientists at the time, and one or two of the other ladies on the left are one of the administrators, and we don't know who the one not facing us is. But that's what the library looked like way back when. And that was the temporary location for the library. It started out in the wing, the history wing of one of the exhibit halls that are now the Mammal Hall that you saw in the other picture. But in 1926, this was designated the temporary location, and it didn't look as good as this soon after, because it got really filled with things, but it was still very good. But 80 years later, almost, or more, the library is still located there because they did not build another building that they thought they might. So that's what that's all about. So, okay. This is what the library looks like. It says 2013. It more or less looks like it today, too. A little bit better, but you can see it's got lots of books like anyone would, and we've got, to the upper right, there's a bunch of our own publications. We are a scholarly publication publisher, and in that glass case is some of our rare books. That glass case is now empty because I just put not those books, but other books that were on display back in the vault today. So, but if you stop by, maybe I'll take some out to show you. Okay, so remember I talked about the major initiative to move the museum into the 21st century in many different ways, both physically, programmatically, and whatnot. And so when I joined, the library which you'll see a picture of shortly, was under plastic. It was pretty nasty due to lots of reasons, but it was closed for a couple of years. So they called that big initiative that they were doing NHM Next. So I called mine Library Next, because nothing's better than simple words for executives and general public. They just like simple things. So as it says there, I wanted to turn the perception of the library and ultimately now the archive, because the archive just became part of my organization a couple months ago, from a passive, dusty, inactive place to an active source of information education aligned with museum initiatives. Yes, archives are responsible for protection and longevity of information. Yes, librarians are important facilitators of access to information, and museum people are all about educating people about topics and using artifacts and content to do that. But we still need to work in other ways with each other to really make this happen. So on the right, we didn't have a library system, an online library system. We only had a card catalog, so I got that in place. We didn't have a website that was active, so I reactivated that. And you see me there on the right in the picture talking with the great-granddaughter of a scientist from 100 years ago and showing her some original artwork from our archives that were, because she had never seen it before, and get her energized about it and maybe have her family donate money one day. So you do what you got to do. So, okay, so that's the basic technologies. But here's the challenges. One, and this is true with all these kinds of institutions and will be for a bit longer. The IMLS came out with a paper regarding museums and libraries in the 21st century and what that would look like. And you can get that free on the imls.gov website. And I encourage you to take a look at it. It's pretty broad and all that, but it's got useful information. But the key is the relevancy and utilization of museums, libraries, and archives in the 21st century. They are in question by all sorts of people. Why do we need a physical library? There's Google. Why do we need archives? They don't have anything useful except to just store stuff. And I'm telling you the brutal truth that I hear, and you might have read or heard about. What about museums? Do they really serve as the function that they used to 20, 30, 50 years ago? So how can we all bring new life, imagination, and creative reuse to all that stuff so that people find it interesting and useful and want to fund it and hire you to be a part of it when it's perceived to be old data and closed collections? And how do you do that when, for instance, in my case, the library 15 years ago had 5 full-time people. I'm now a solo librarian with the only staff I have is my one archivist staff person to do the archives type stuff. I have a work study student and wonderful volunteers, of which Nancy and some others have been. And I encourage you to explore that. So how do you do all that? Well, you demonstrate results. And here's the lady again from Commander Dammers was the guy's name. And this is the Dammers family. And she told me this is only a portion of her brood, as she put it. She has a huge family. And they were amazed at the materials that were in these very unarchival binders, yes, and unarchival plastic sleeves. And that's a project that if I can get funding to maybe hire one of you one day to help rehouse and properly index and do all that kind of stuff, that would be great. So meanwhile, one of 3 key things our director of our museum, who's the head of the whole place, said was, when I had her in the library, was 3 things. One is everything in there should have a purpose, otherwise it doesn't belong there. Number 2, you have to have people using it. So I use this kind of picture to show, yes, people are using it. And 3, use technology effectively. And I said, well, that's what I do. So this is what, from a CEO's level standpoint. So it's important for you, always try to find out what the highest level person that you can find, what are their expectations? And it could be that it's the general public that is your highest level person that you need to know. What are their expectations? And how can you ensure that what you're doing is relevant to them, because otherwise your survival will be in question. And that's a kind of a business-oriented look to it, but it works. It's really important, whether you're in academia, cultural institutions, whatever. So, okay, so let's get into the technology stuff, the cool stuff. Well, there's lots of it. There's everything from library systems like our EOS. We have EOS now, a Cersei Dynix company, library system. That's pretty old hat these days. Of course, there's all the social media, Flickr, Facebook, blah, blah, blah. 3D printing has come and become almost commonplace in some respects, but still new. Like, what can we really effectively do with it? There's cloud computing, which is really almost ubiquitous and important in so many different ways. And you have infographics like the shark graphic in the lower left, and that one was a great one I found on the Creative Commons and Flickr, which is the sharks of business, which I thought, oh, cool. They really took that concept and brought it out and have facts and figures and stuff. And then on the right, I gave a talk about 2 years ago on informatics in the 21st century, how information is represented in 2 dimensions and now into 3 dimensions graphically, and used there was a graphic done using the Tokyo subway system to represent all the information businesses like Google and Facebook and all the others and how it looks. And if you're interested in that, let me know, because that was a fascinating graphic to find. And then on the left, there is a company called Altmetric. There's also lots of other companies that have altmetric kinds of things, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So there's all sorts of different technologies that can do different things, and to go through all that clutter, you really have to understand what is it you need, what is it you want to do, how you want to do it. That's your strategy plan. That's your technology strategy plan. And then what technologies or applications or implementations would best suit what your needs are. Just like you say, well, what kind of computer do I need at home? Because I know I need one. Do I use a laptop? Do I use a tablet? Do I use this? Do I use that? It's all that kind of thing. And, what does my budget allow me to have? I'd like a Rolls Royce, but I can only afford a Prius. So what am I going to do? Or a bicycle, so you work it out. And that's really important to understand. And if you just throw technology at it thinking it's going to work, well, that's a problem, unless you do it in a coherent way. So digitization is one aspect of all of that offers lots of opportunities, because it takes analog stuff and enables it to become much more accessible, because everyone around the world is getting to understand the digital world through the internet, right? So museums, they are a rich resource of artifacts and original research content, because many people don't understand, for instance, museums do a lot of fundamental research, name species, discover species, are often called upon to identify things when they're dug up, when construction goes on. For our new subway, for instance, here, paleontologists are called in, archaeologists are called in on appropriate. Libraries are a major source and influencer in digital transitions, because that's what we do these days. We know how to do it. And we have a lot of two-dimensional material, and we have some three-dimensional material. Tons of analog stuff and more digital stuff. And when I was in the corporate world at Amgen, we turned our library from a pretty much print-oriented, because we had 20,000 employees globally. We needed to have them access it all, into lots of digital. And my understanding, I've been gone 5 years, is that it's pretty much all digital now, and almost no print is used except for historic purposes. In archives, lots of original content in lots of different formats. It's typically historical institutional information, depending upon what the definition of the archive is, but classically it's that, but it could be other content. It can have original research papers, drawings, artifacts, two-dimensional and three-dimensional objects, which gets a little crazy when how do you house and organize three-dimensional objects. All of you archives people know how to do that, or are learning how to do that. And of course, analog and digital stuff. And so that's the context of it. So how do you do it? Well, internal collaboration is really important, because, I was working with the archivist when she was in the history department, because a lot of our stuff overlapped, and I even had archive material housed in the library. And actually, the archives was originally in the library and then expanded out, and then now it's partially back, and trying to coordinate all that. But I also I have to deal with IT just like everybody. Information technology people had a kind of a verbal fight this morning with yesterday with one of them about what he didn't want to do, and that was interesting. But having come from a technology background, they mostly appreciate what I have to say because I understand what their jobs are and have done pieces of it. Certainly legal when it comes to licensing and signing contracts and all that. Conservation, because we have a lot of materials that are very old and they have the expertise with our objects as well as books and paper, although our current conservation people are wonderful. They are limited in their paper experience, but they do have great colleagues that they call upon to help us out. And of course the registrar in a museum, because all objects are inventoried through the registrar, and anything accessioned, which is similar to cataloging, the registrar is going to have all those records. So oftentimes when I find things, and I'm finding, even though I've been there 4.5 years, I keep finding new things, I find a little A number, which is an accession number for us, and I have in India ink in the back and written in little small letters. I have to go up to the registrar and look in the records and see, well, who donated it, when did they do it, were there any restrictions, blah, blah, blah. And then the rest of the departments in our institution, which happened in our case to be the rest of the research organization, which I am a part of, the education department, the exhibits department, the advancement or fundraising department, and marketing, and all the miscellaneous other people. So what's all the collaboration about? Well, sharing of priorities, because we're all in it together to achieve the mission and goals of the museum, which I kind of glossed over a few pages ago, but which is to really look at the mission, which is to inspire wonder, discovery, and responsibility for our natural and cultural worlds. So that's the big umbrella. And any institution or organization you belong to has a mission. Even a corporation, they have a mission. Like at Amgen, ours was to make medicines or to ensure patients had a good life or something to that effect. I can't remember, so don't quote me on that. But, you know, it was a very good, broad thing. But, you know, so the priorities need to match that. There are infrastructure needs, and in Unity there is strength because you're going to need computers, so working with IT to support your case, working with advancement for the fundraising of somebody who maybe can pay for what you need, that kind of thing. And then strategic initiatives. What's going on in the big institution that you can be an active participant, which also helps you get resources, whether it's people, money, the walls painted, you know, the floor vacuumed, lots of basic things or really fancy things. So, so there's that kind of thing. And then there's external collaboration. And here's an example where 2 years ago for all the students, some of you might, I think 1 or 2 of you at least participated, was a Christmas, well, it was a holiday party, not just a Christmas party. It was a holiday party for all the students. All students came for free. It was in the brand new West Hollywood Public Library. And the manager of that was the young lady in black in the lower right-hand picture. And the county librarian, Margaret Todd, is on the right there, and she came as well. And so you got to meet these people, number one. Number two is there were other librarians that were invited as well, although we discouraged them. We wanted more of the students to be there. And then as there was room, have the professionals come in so you all could meet each other. So that was fun. And then the upper right was a volunteer work day at my library, at my institution, by a lot of professional people and students who came and helped me just move books and do stuff like that, organize stuff in my library, and that's really good. So, and sometimes you collaborate with institutions that are similar or libraries that are similar and some that are not. So here I was, a cultural institution that was quasi-public library in the past, collaborating with the public library and with special libraries, because there's several people in that picture in the upper right who are from corporate libraries, and also from associations. A lot of them happen to be SLA, but I think a few are SAA and ASIS members as well. So doing joint events like that. So, but it also is important to cooperate beyond your borders, whatever those borders are. So multi-institutional, you know, either by discipline or by geography, and digital world enables you to do lots of things otherwise not possible. So a couple of ways you can do this. So say you don't have the money or the staff or the expertise. Well, centralized digitization through a project can maximize resources, reduce the local need for those resources and expertise, and I'm going to explain examples of that real quick very soon. Digitization of resources can be amortized among those institutions. Book editions of journal gaps can be filled in, and it can be very effective by these two projects. So let me get to those projects for you. Just before I do, remember, I'm working in a solo operation, 3 sites, limited resources. There I am talking about our publications, and it's both the library and archives. One of the ways I used technology was with our duplicate books that were sold. I used the money to buy a camera stand set up, a digital camera, and we took condition reports on our rare books and cataloged them and accessioned them. And we also identified some audiovisual materials that were deemed necessary through a grant project I'll get to in a sec. And then we used this setup also for digitizing materials as part of this international collaboration. And we have been scanning in our scholarly publications, and the objective there is to use our library system with a tool called Knowledge Builder to have full text keyword access to all of our scholarly publications globally for free. And then looking at some research metrics to tell the story of how effective all the research in our organization is. So let me talk a little bit about those. So again, I mentioned the Rare Books Initiative. One of my interns from UCLA, another school, she was helping me with that. And in the lower left, you see one of the books that we were doing a condition report on. And we linked it to our OCLC cataloging and as well as to this multi-million-dollar specimen management system. So that was one aspect of using technology. And you heard me mention Knowledge Builder. There's some information about it, particularly for scholarly publications, full text access. But also we're using it for consulting reports on visitors studies, because visitors are important. They are our general public. We're using this tool to build metadata databases for our map and art collections, and we're looking at how we might use it for our special collections as well. So, digital audiovisual materials. Here's a quote from the California Audiovisual Preservation Project. We must save our audiovisual heritage before it's too late. Analog recordings are threatened by fragile physical condition, format obsolescence, and lack of playback equipment. Absolutely true in my place, because this was not on my priority list, as I'll point out to you here. I was busy taking that picture on the upper left there, which was the library I walked into, under plastic and everything else. My priority was just to get it workable, which is what I did, working with lots of volunteers and through a lot of negotiation, lots of help. So audiovisual digitization wasn't on my priority list, but I knew we had film reels, and we had audio tapes, and we had DAC tapes, and we had all sorts of other stuff that I kept unearthing under the plastic. And some of it original stuff that was donated to us and whatnot. So when I went to a workshop about 1.5 years ago on this, the California Audiovisual Preservation Project, and they, through the IMLS, NEH, and the State Library of California funds that were granted, they're a project office that's run out of Berkeley, will enable us to digitize audiovisual materials, and we just have to identify them, and I'll tell you how here. This is a partnership of 84 libraries and archives and museums, so it's a real interesting combination of collaboration, right, and through this functional office, funded by those 3 groups I told you about. And what they do is they provide the digitization and access services for, and they were looking at, particularly for the grant purposes, historic California audiovisual recording, so that they could prove that this was useful and then get more funding. And also any other kinds of rare materials that were on audiovisual formats that were frankly, had celebrities on it or important people on it of some sort, or important from historic purpose, but mainly focused on California as just a way to put a gate around it and make that available globally through the Internet Archive. So that where it gets posted ultimately. So it's the project office calls themselves California Light and Sound Collection. You can go to the Internet Archive and see archive.org and search for that and see all the different institutions that have already digitized materials, and it's an ongoing project. And if you search for my institution, the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County in particular, then you'll see a bunch of listings of ours. And some examples of ours are two exciting ones. One is the NHM Elephant Exhibit Hall that opened in April 1966. We found the video of it, the film, but we haven't found the audio, which is too bad, but anyone of a certain age or older would know who these celebrities in that picture are. And what's interesting to me is this week we just released our holiday card for the year, and it happens to be the family of elephants in that exhibit. Great opportunity. The marketing department did that. They chose that along with the director who approved it, I'm sure. But because we have this, I'm going to figure out a way to tie in the fact that, oh, did you know that that family of elephants that's on exhibit, that exhibit hall opened in 1966, and you can see a little movie of the people at the opening reception on the internet for free and get that organized. So here's where the archive and the library and marketing come together, you know, serendipitously almost, and maybe can make hay out of that in a couple of ways, and you know, raising awareness and all that. Then the other key thing is La Brea Tar Pits. We found film of what was called Asphalt Friday when they opened up what they call Pit 91, which was opened back in 1913 and had been closed for a while and then was reopened with golden shovels, and there's a whole political thing. And we found the audio finally after we found the video, and then we found the synced audio and video, but it's not great, it's kind of raw. It's been posted, and that has great implications for what we're trying to do at the tar pit. So that's real exciting as well. And I'll tell you, a year and a half ago, that was not on my radar screen, but because the tar pits renovations that haven't been done yet, and we have to raise money to do it, and we just raised $135 million for the big museum, so it's kind of hard to go back to the same people for a couple more million when you just ask them for some, but you never know. But this is a great way to support that effort. So the value of working with this office in Berkeley was we're able to preserve unique AV content before it was lost totally, which is rotting faster than the books on the shelf, at least in our case. It enables access to content otherwise inaccessible due to the fragility, which we had all sorts of problems with, and we don't have any equipment to play it on, so I couldn't even look at the stuff to tell them what it was. I had to guess by labels and all sorts of stuff, and when they, you know, educated guess. Revitalize the content for use in research, marketing, education, as I just described. Invigorates the Research Library and Archives presence, and demonstrates that the Research Library and Archives participate in the broad goal of the mission and the goals and initiatives going on. And that's critical because in this meeting I'm having tomorrow with the Vice President, I can point to these kinds of things about why the money spent in the Library and Archives gives us more than you think it does, or you may be aware. And so let me talk briefly, very briefly, about another initiative, which is the Biodiversity Heritage Library. This is an international effort for scanning biodiversity-related materials that are out of copyright or where copyright has licensee owners have granted permission to scan and make available in a quality way content for research purposes and more. And that's a consortium of 15 natural history, botanical, and research institutions, mainly in North America, but also, or United States, and also in the UK. But there are global centers as well, with the purpose of open access, full text digital library access of this legacy literature, and big deal on open data. which is another lecture sometime. And it is an expanding global effort. In fact, on this map, you'll see we have the Biodiversity Heritage Library, which project office is based out of the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., but has centers in Europe, in China, in Africa, in Australasia area, as well as the Middle East and South America. So quite a fascinating global partnership. And the key for you, from a technology standpoint, is they're using all sorts of technologies, because what the idea is to scan locally and coordinate globally. So a lot of institutions are either scanning in-house or their materials are being sent to an authorized Internet Archive scanning place. But because a lot of materials are rare and delicate, it stays in-house. Whereas the California audiovisual materials, we have to ship it to Berkeley, which then shipped it to Pennsylvania with careful packaging and then shipped back, and all sorts of insurance issues which involve the legal and registrar and all that kind of stuff. But they're using a lot of tools to collaborate with each other. We all are. We're using Skype. We're using Dropbox to exchange files. There's all sorts of software tracking that's being used to know what journals are being digitized, that kind of thing. So, and using wikis for documenting that. So really a fascinating use of that. And two key projects I'm going to talk about in a second. But here's the main site if you're interested. And we use this for research all the time, as do lots of people around the world, to identify research articles in old books, that kind of thing. But if you go to biodiversitylibrary.org, you can take a look and play around. The interface needs major upgrades. It's a lot better than it used to be, but it could use so many more enhancements, and that's being worked on. You can see millions of pages, lots of titles and volumes, but there's two key initiatives you'll want to think about and maybe investigate on your own. One is this thing called Art of Life, which is doing data mining and crowdsourcing for identifying and describing the illustrations in everything that's been scanned. So the Missouri Botanical Garden in St. Louis has a bunch of people, very smart people, who develop software that enables, that can, navigate through all of the content that was scanned and identify that, gee, there's some kind of object on that page. But what it can't do is identify whether that's an image, a graph, a drawing, or other kind of object. And so what they're doing is, and this is where I guess my little graphic got over the words, but they're virtually training volunteers. And I was the one, I will say, who suggested library graduate students to be considered, and they started doing that to help identify, look at the page and say, oh, that's a graph, and click that box, or no, that's a line drawing, click that box. It's kind of mundane, but they've got thousands and thousands, I forget how many thousands off the top of my head, but certainly in the 6-digit area. And so that just tens of thousands for sure, if not hundreds of thousands of images that need to be identified, and through crowdsourcing and volunteer work, they're doing that in a coherent way. And you could join in on that. And so the people to contact are noted. If you go to the Biodiversity Heritage Library website, you'll see information about that. A related one is the use of purposeful gaming, which is to help identify old texts that, as you see an example of, OCR can't really do very well because it's unusual kinds of fonts that were used in the old days, and or things were handwritten. And who says you shouldn't learn how to write cursive in grade school? How are you going to read all the stuff from years ago by your grandparents, let alone scholars and whatnot? So what they're doing is they're developing a prototype using gaming techniques, working with a gaming company to identify these 15th to 19th century pages and what the words are. And in the lower middle, you see Chris Freeland and Trish Rose Sandler. These are the contact people for both of those initiatives. And go ahead and write to them. Trish has already heard from several people, from other people I've talked to in other talks. in other speeches. And if you're at all interested in any of this, again, the gaming part is just beginning. They haven't implemented the prototype yet. They're calling it Boincing Angry Birds for BHL, was one aspect, and that could be a very interesting thing. So that QR code, sorry, I had a mind blank there for a second. The QR code, you can get links to the information as well. So I know we're just about out of time, and I'm just about done. So I think we're good. So research analysis without metrics. Okay, here's the challenge. My vice president, I go to department meetings every month, and I reported directly to him for a while. Now I report to another person who reports to him, but I meet with him regularly. And here's his challenge, and any research institution's senior person is going to have this challenge, which is, how does your organization elevate awareness and impact of the impact and value of research activities? This goes for places like mine, it goes for academia, it even goes for corporate, aside from the products that are being developed. So how do you do that? Well, we have meetings where we talk about publishing an impact factor, high impact factor journals, and I go through all that mishigash and that mess of what that really means and what an impact factor is. But they grab onto numbers. But we also talk about who was interviewed on NPR, who was in the New York Times, who was written up in a blog, a scientific blog, and all that kind of stuff. Well, there's different products out there that touch on that kind of thing. At the article level, and there's also social media related tools out there, such as you've got ProQuest Flow, you've got Mendeley, you've got Altmetric, which is one that we're going to be using, testing out a little bit of, to get data on what's being looked at. It's not a qualitative, it's a quantitative. And that's one thing we're going to be looking at. And I would suggest strongly you read this article, Riding the Crest of the Altmetrics Wave. It's already a year old and already out of date in some ways, but it brings up some really key points. And I know that there's some major named researchers who poo-poo any kind of altmetrics as well that really doesn't measure anything useful or important. And in a workshop I was in recently, we had a person who said her researchers will not talk about or have their stuff on Twitter, etc., because they just don't consider that useful for their reputation. Well, nice to say today, but what about tomorrow? Because people are talking about your stuff, whether you want to know that or not. So how do you grab onto that and make sense of it and describe it to your bosses of how it can be useful, and to your marketing department? Well, that's one way potentially you can do it. So I'm going to be giving a talk on this as part of a panel at Computers and Libraries in April in Washington, D.C., with a panel of other people. Stay tuned. So how can all this wonderful stuff be done? Well, it'd be great if I could pay people. Don't have that money right now, but I have lots of wonderful graduate student volunteers and general volunteers. And this is just a microcosm of the many people who have helped me in the past. And I didn't get a picture of everybody all the time, because some people just don't like their picture taken either. But there's a bunch here, and many have gotten jobs. In fact, the red and the orange designate lots of people who, the orange tends to be people are mixed, that some have jobs, some don't yet, they're still in school, and others with the red definitely have jobs. And then the blue or the purple, whatever you want to call it in the lower left, are all the professionals that already have jobs and that we're helping out. So just as an example. So I do a lot of segregating and color coding. So review. Museums, libraries, archives, sometimes known as LAMs, sometimes because galleries get put in there, so sometimes they're GLAMs, are reimagining their roles. They have valuable content that can be valued through digitizing it. Audiovisual materials are particularly important to really look at. And collaboration and cooperation at every level, locally and internationally, and in between, everything in between, is really important. So with that, much appreciation to everybody at my institution, both staff and volunteers. to Pamela at the California Light and Sound Project Office at Berkeley, and all these wonderful people from the Missouri Botanical Garden and the BHL Project Office. And so now you need to take these pieces and start putting them together for your own success, and that for our professions. And if you will, any questions? The question Nancy has is, did they digitize using their own equipment? I'll get to that in just a second. So any of you have questions? I know we're like more or less over time, but I'll be here for a few more minutes, no problem, and answer the questions. But did they use, okay, no worries about the time, good. For the audiovisual, what happened with the audiovisual was we identified titles of things and descriptions of things into Content DM, the OCLC2 Content DM. That was accessed by the project office. They determined which ones sounded good to them because you had to say why it should be digitized. They told us which ones were approved. We shipped them up to Berkeley. They did some quality checks on them, the conditions, whether there was moisture damage, blah, blah, blah. It was shipped to Pennsylvania, where a firm had been identified and hired to do the actual digitization. So in the case of the project, that was done back east by this company, and they've done an excellent job. And they've sent back stuff that was just too far gone that they could not do under the parameters of the grant. It would require a lot more specialized work. Like, for instance, one film had moisture damage and the emulsion was being pulled off as the reel was unreeling. So that could be fixed, but it would require lots of time, money, and expertise. That the content on it, honestly, is not that important. But if it was, there would be potential ways to do that. So, but some institutions are doing their stuff locally. Like USC and UCLA do a lot of their own audiovisual locally. And we're going to work with USC, which is right across the street from us, with some potential stuff that didn't qualify under the grant, that maybe they'll work with us with some funding or something to do. So I mentioned a graphic about translating items from 2D to 3D. No, sorry. The idea is that there's lots of 2D material and 3D material. The graphic I was talking about was representing information that we typically have represented in graphs and charts in 2 dimensions, and using three-dimension visualization tools to show the third axis where you can navigate through it. If that graphic that I showed, which was the subway, it's a interactive graphic, kind of like looking at Google Earth and then being able to fly over it and go at a different angle and reposition yourself. So something like that. So that would be interesting as well. And I don't know, things scrolled up, so I don't know if there were other questions as well. And I'm going to just move this slide ahead to, that's me, that's my blog. I need to update it. That was a interview the Royal Society did of me last year that was published, which is pretty cool, over in the UK, but they did it virtually from here, although I was there in London recently. There's my email. Down below is my library site. You can certainly take a look. That's me with my award from SLA for being a fantastic member and contributor at one time on a project, so that was fun. And that's me holding a fossilized brain of a whale, which I know is impossible, but that's another story. Any other questions? There's 17 of you still there, so that's good. I'm happy to answer any questions, mundane, broad, or whatever. But as you think about it, it's my pleasure to do this. I'm always interested to let people know about what we are, who we are, that there is a big museum on the West Coast that does amazing things, has amazing stuff in all sorts of ways, culturally as well as scientifically. The library's in the ground floor. It's for the staff mainly, but open for visitors from like yourselves. Just let me know. How have my efforts translated to funding for the library archives from administration? Are they responding? Yes. Because I physically, with my wonderful volunteers and the operations team, took off the plastic, got the books in order, got into this grant thing and have vociferously showed them, hey, did you see this thing on this short film clip? I showed it to the CEO and my vice president in a special meeting a couple of months ago, and to show her how this effort was unearthing things that could potentially be used, and it was just raw footage. So she looked at for instance, the elephant exhibit opening, and she also I showed her the tar pits of people with the golden shovels digging and chatting away at a podium. And she says, this is great, but what's the real story? Because she wanted the story that said that she could talk to the trustees, to potential funders, fundraisers and stuff, of what does it do for us? And this is where I said, that's coming. So I just wanted you to understand that. So sometimes jumping the gun puts you in that rabbit hole kind of, oh my God moment, gosh moment, but at the same time it's worth it because she's aware things are being done. So now I can go back and say, well, here's how. Look at this Christmas card, this holiday card rather, that now we have a story linked to that we can say people can not only, in fact, we should have put it on the holiday card in there. I'll have to talk to marketing. Too late. I'm going to put it on mine, my copies. But, and just do that. And was my position, did it exist prior to my hire? Well, they've had a librarian since the 1920s, on and off, pretty much solid all the way up until 2008, when the former librarian, he retired and then left, and at the same time they happened to get funding for earthquake retrofit, so they decided to close the library rather than spend the effort hiring somebody, and this 3-month project turned into a 3.5-year project. So I was hired about 2 years into that 3.5-year project, and they were actually going to sell off the library at one point. They were thinking, and all sorts of things, because the museum was in a very sad financial state of affairs in the early 2000s. And so they were maybe not going to even open it up again, but they decided wisely to do that. And so I have to demonstrate every day why that was a good idea and why they should keep paying me. So, that is a big deal. In fact, my meeting tomorrow is, I'll tell you, why should we be spending all this money for journals and publications? The prices are outrageous, and the budget for the library is so big with this, and is it going to increase next year, the pricing of all this stuff? And I said, of course it is. I have no control over publishers. So I've got to talk about alternatives and how we can get the right subscriptions electronically or in print or whatever. So, you got to do what you got to do. So that's why, thank goodness, they were smart enough to hire somebody experienced. That's why, yeah, Hero, thanks. I like to think of it that way. I don't know that. But, we're all superheroes, internet superheroes, as my colleague had said, Sonia, but we have to demonstrate it in lots of ways. And every minute you're challenged, whether it's budget or show me to be able to be flexible and draw on all your skills and techniques. And I'll tell you, my negotiation techniques, the business viewpoint on like a business, sort of, but I have to keep those principles in mind, and they are really good. Because if I sat and cataloged all the books that need to be cataloged, yeah, I'd get a bunch of mention of the CFO. I wouldn't have the ability to have work study students funded and all that stuff. So, you got to pick your battles, and sometimes we through, which is a whole nother lecture, that the whole principle of that we're going to look at, but the CFO and my vice president both said, okay, this is worth really being talked about beyond just our 4 walls or 18 walls or whatever it is. So anyway, thank you, Nan. A bunch of you online, so hit me with it. Hit me with your best shot. And if any of you are in the LA area, come see me. Come talk to me. I had somebody who was just taking a class in writing grants, and so she helped me with the outlining a potential project grant proposal. Your OPAC isn't giving you usage statistics. Well, yeah, it is. But here's the funny thing. is that there's a lot of departmental libraries, so a lot of the stuff is being used, and I don't have any way to know that. So, you know, there you go. So, so certainly I use that in my story. This is where I'm using that information combined with my usage statistics from my online service providers, like we have access to Nature online, we have Scientific American online, we have Science Magazine online. So I draw the statistics of those, put them into charts, try to make them coherent and useful, and just use it in the overall story. And most of the time I don't get an opportunity to stand or sit next to the executives and explain it, so I have to, off the top of my head, come out with this stuff at any moment when I run in. And, you know, it's that 3-minute or 30-second elevator speech thing that you might have heard about. You just got to know. And sometimes when they ask you, how things going, in the other way, saying, oh, no, he's going to start dragging me down for 10 minutes about some mundane thing I don't have time to listen